Hi, and welcome to the first day of Invasive Species Week. So I'm Kat Hinton, I work for Shropshire Wildlife Trust, and I run the Shropshire Invasive Non-Native Species Initiative, which is a project that's part of our land and water team. We call it SINSI for short, because that's just a little bit easier. So first, let's just try and define what we mean by an invasive non-native species. A native species is anything that is natural to this country, that has evolved here, and that's quite difficult to define. So how far back do you go to decide that something's native or not? But it's anything that has naturally evolved or grown here. A non-native species then is anything that's been introduced to this country from elsewhere. Most of them are no problem at all, and over the years I think we've had over 2,000 species of animals and plants that have been introduced to the UK from all over the world, and most of those non-native species are of no threat at all to our native populations. Of those non-native species that are introduced to this country, some are classified as naturalised. So things like rabbits, for instance. Rabbits aren't actually native to this country, but they've been here so long, they're not a problem. You know, we see them as part of our landscape. Something is classed as an invasive non-native species, though, when it starts to have a negative impact on other organisms. So they tend to have nothing that naturally controls them, so perhaps no herbivores that eat them if it's a plant, or any pathogens or diseases that affect their numbers, so their numbers get out of control. And about 10 to 15% of our non-native species in this country are now classed as invasive. So first of all, let's look at some of the causes of invasive non-native species. Where are they coming from? So a lot of them are horticulture, gardening. So, you know, especially the Victorians, they were great plant hunters, and they brought lots and lots of plants back to this country, including, in that top image there, rhododendrons. So we have a lot of plants that were brought here because we thought they were beautiful, and they've escaped out into the wild. Some animals were brought because we wanted to grow them and eat them. So an example of that is like the edible dormouse, and the grey squirrel was another one that people thought were interesting. Invasive species in some countries are things that have been brought in order to control other things. So there's a famous example in Australia where cane toads were taken there, and of course all sorts of problems. But more commonly these days, it's the fact that we live in this very, very global world, and so there's, you know, huge amounts of travel worldwide, and people accidentally bring things back with them, and also shipping, this sort of international economy that we have now. Some of the problems that these invasive species can cause are mostly, we're talking about damage to ecosystems. So these invasive non-native species can cause all sorts of problems to our own native wildlife. Some of these invasive species, like the grey squirrel there, famously causes all sorts of problems for our native red squirrels. They're much larger, they're more aggressive, and they also have brought disease with them that doesn't affect them, but does affect our native red squirrels. So there's all sorts of problems with these invasive species. So other examples of invasive non-native species are ash dieback, which is causing a lot of our ash trees to die at the moment, and that was introduced into the UK accidentally on timber that was shipped in from abroad. Other examples of invasive non-native species are certain types of flatworms that were in plant pots of plants that were shipped in from abroad for people's gardens. These invasive non-native species can cost the UK economy up to £1.7 billion per year. So it's a huge cost to our economy. So here in Shropshire, we decided to try and see what we could do about invasive non-native species in this country. So we set up this SINSI project. Initially it's a 3-year project with 2 sources of funding, part funded by Severn Trent and part funded through what we call a WEG, a Water Environment Grant. And the thought was we would have a catchment based approach, so we're looking along certain water courses, and we've got 8 focus areas initially, and these were areas that were upstream of certain reserves and SSSIs, where if invasive species got in there, that could really affect the quality of that habitat. So the first invasive species that we're looking at, that we're focusing on at the moment as part of the SINSI project, is Himalayan balsam, this plant with these bright pink flowers on. And as part of our project, we have looked to set up several local action groups around the county who are working to remove that Himalayan balsam in their neighbourhood. Another aspect of the project is to try and record and map as many of these invasive species around the county as we can. So not just Himalayan balsam, but other things that we can see out and about us. And we're hoping to roll that out a little bit more this summer. So keep in touch and we'll tell you more about that in the next couple of months. But also in terms of the Himalayan balsam, it's about physical management. So we're setting up groups in different areas and actively pulling up that Himalayan balsam where we can, and in other areas we're actually using a method of what's called biocontrol to try and remove and reduce the numbers of the plants. But also it's very important within this project that we continue to raise public awareness around invasive species and what we can do about them, and hopefully over the course of this coming week, this invasive species week, keep an eye on our social media posts and you'll learn a lot more about invasive species. Thank you very much for watching.